Welcome, ladies and gents. We are back with another episode of Think Fast. And my dear friend Varun Rala is still in Thailand getting liposuction done. Don't forget to tweet at him, ladies and gents. But I have got Varun Dugi ka Bap in today's episode. We've got none other than the OG of all podcasting OGs, Mr. Amit Doshi is in the house.
Hey, Suchita, so glad to be here. I'm really enjoying this show, so I'm glad to be on it. It's fun. I think I'm gonna have a great
You
time.
have you have no option but to enjoy the show, Amit. You're
Well,
funding the
that's
show.
true. That's true. No, but I am enjoying the show. But I really do. I like the opinions that you and Varun. I like the fact that you guys aren't always in agreement with each other. That's what makes this kind of thing fun.
Yes, a little Sas Bahu goes a long way. No, but this week's been pretty interesting, man. I know
Mhm.
something that caught your eye was the Kashmir files and all the hoopla around that. So, why don't you kick us off, Amit? Tell us a little bit about what's happening and what's the controversy here and why is
Well,
everyone so riled up about it?
so I think what's interesting to me, right, is that Kashmir Files is clearly a propaganda film. It has a point of view, and
Hmm.
it's going in a particular, and it's pushing that point of view. Now, agree or disagree with that point of view, it's a point of view, right? But what I found interesting is that this kind of a blatantly propagandistic film has very rarely worked in India, right? I mean, like
Hmm.
this is very politically propaganda-ish, right? The two that I can think of that came off very recently before it was the accident of Prime Minister with Manmohan Singh and
Hmm.
PM Narendra Modi with where Vivek Oberoi played Narendra Modi, right? And
Hmm.
neither of those worked at all, right? I mean, like both of them were pretty miserable box office flops. But this has really kind of struck a chord, and I just think that are we going to see more of this? Because traditionally in the world, this has been successful, right?
Hmm.
Propaganda in the world has like kind of worked and I mean, like, if you look at like 90% of Hollywood war movies or movies involving
Yeah,
the military are American propaganda, right?
100%.
Similarly, and there's a long history of this, right? Leni Riefenstahl, who made the Adolf Hitler movies,
Hmm.
those were super propagandistic. Russia made the battleship Potemkin, again,
Hmm.
a very just a very propaganda kind of, like, pro-Soviet kind of this. So this
Yeah.
stuff is out there, and it goes in the other direction as well. Fahrenheit 9/11, that's
Yeah.
pure propaganda, right? I mean, like, I was no fan of George W. Bush, but that movie was nonsense, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, like, there is there's so much left propaganda or right propaganda. So I mean, like, if
Yeah.
we're going to see is this kind of stuff as we go ahead, it's I don't know. I just think it's interesting that we're starting to see that come through in India.
100%. And like a point that you brought up is media literacy and the need for it, right?
Hmm.
Especially in today's day and age where people are so easily influenced
Hmm.
and also easily motivated by clickbait, right? And there is no motivation to even deep dive into what is the source of this content and what's the origin of this information.
Yep.
I think something that should be taught in schools is media literacy. How do you consume information with limited bias, and
Hmm.
also knowing that every information consumed, there has to be due diligence around it.
Always check your writer, always check your director, always check who these people are, right? uh, I mean, there's a little divergent from this, right? But one of the things that always annoys me about Twitter is the screenshotting stuff where people are like, I
Oh
won't link
man.
to the original stuff. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, no, man, when you don't link to the original stuff, I don't know who that original person is. So if I
Yeah.
see a screenshot, I take it much less seriously than if you're
Hmm.
linking back to the original person, because I want to know what the context of the person you're linking to is. I want to know the
Yeah.
context of what you're doing this, right? Is And I think that yeah, the fact that we try and divorce context from different pieces of this is propagandistic in its own self. So
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah. And speaking of propaganda, I don't know if you saw there was this takedown piece on money
yes,
control. about Gaurav Munjal,
Hmm.
and the story insinuated all sorts of things. Apparently, a work culture that isn't very, conducive to I don't know what, but the words used were like toxic work culture. He apparently takes, private jets and this, that, and the other. I don't know if you read the piece, but I was actually like very I won't say upset, but I was very like, what is going on after I read that
Yeah.
article? Because
Yeah.
it almost seemed like the writer wrote the title of the article before they got the copy in place.
Yeah.
And I think if you call yourself a journalist, I mean, you need to state the facts, right? Like there was this one part of the article where the writer wrote some stuff along the lines of how apparently Gaurav Munjal, who, ladies and gentlemen, is the co-founder and CEO of Unacademy, a very large, edtech focused platform. He apparently has a guy who, reads books for him and summarizes them into pages because he's very like obsessed with productivity.
Mm.
And the writer wrote something along the lines of, what a surgical approach to consumption of like literature and books. And
Yeah.
it just seemed very personal. It just seemed as if like the writer had a problem with the
Yeah.
subject matter. And everything was rooted in opinion. It was kind of gross, man.
I hear exactly what you're saying. There is this. I don't want to call it moralistic, because moralistic implies that there is positivity towards it, right? But there's
Hmm.
kind of this. There's this sense that you see in a lot of tech writing these days, not just Indian writing but even international writing, right? You see a lot of this kind of like, hey, we got to take these people down a peg or two. We
Yeah.
got to kind of like, that that they are by default going to be somewhat evil.
Hmm.
Maybe
Hmm.
not evil, but like, they're gonna lead to excesses. Everybody's
Yeah.
gonna be Travis. Everybody's
Yeah.
gonna be, I mean, like, there's
Elizabeth
this
Holmes
sense.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a sense of that in the way that this stuff is covered. And I mean, like, there are overreactions to this that occur, but I mean, like, I do think that you definitely see that tone come into this. And part of it, I think, is just basic journalist bias towards big tech, because big tech has kind of uh,
Rule
unempowered
the
journalists
roost.
from where they
Yeah.
were,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think that there is a sense of Schadenfreude when they're able to kind of pull big tech down to an extent. But
Yeah,
yeah, I
it's
mean,
also become like a gross like growth hack, right? Like in the US, for example, there's this I don't know if you saw, but like Mark Anderson stood up for Emily Weiss, who's the co-founder and CEO of Glossier, which is a very
okay,
popular beauty company, and they've gone through
did
like a
hear
bit
about
of a
this.
rough patch in the past year. And
Mm,
Business Insider did this very like same very petty takedown piece, about a Glossier, where again it's almost like you're nitpicking, right? Like you're
yeah,
finding instances to make a mountain out of a molehill. And obviously in the US, unlike over here, the takedown has happened specifically with respect to female founders. Like I
yeah.
remember 2020, there wasn't a single female founder who wasn't taken down by American media. Just a horrible sort of like state of affairs.
That sucks. I mean, I don't even know. I honestly, I did not recognize that. But I mean,
Yeah,
like, now that you say that in retrospect, that does seem quite true, right? I mean, like, you do see that you do see that they're looking for the next Elizabeth Holmes, right? I mean, like, I think that's
exactly. The next
essentially,
story. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But in lighter and brighter news, actually, we don't have too much bright news this week. This is going to make for a fun conversation. So, ladies and gents, today I'm going to be covering four topics. The first one will obviously be all the hoopla around Zomato, Blinkit, future of quick commerce, and what's going to happen over there. We're also going to be talking about social commerce, content to commerce, which is obviously a topic we've covered multiple times, but more so in the context of Trell and their latest financials that came out as a part of a ENY audit. We're also going to be covering, we're going to go, deep tech in a way where we'll cover all the no code tools and no code platforms that have come out in the context of Webflow raising a significant round. And Amit is going to school us on all things that are happening in the audio space. There's obviously a lot been happening. IVM being one of the OGs, and then you've of course got Pocket FM, Cuckoo, and so many others coming up. So we'll run through the audio space. Amit, what are you going to cover today?
So I got a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. One is that there is a new consultation paper that SEBI has put out about IPO rules for about new IPO rules they want to do, and these are kind of targeted towards startups. So I think that there is interesting there's some interesting stuff to unpack over here in terms of how business friendly our climate is getting. And then the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is there was a new climate action plan unveiled for Mumbai to be carbon neutral by 2050, and I want to kind of discuss with you and get your thoughts on, like, what you think. Is this practical? Is it not? Where can we go with this?
Super duper. So, packed episode, ladies and gents, and we're going to be back after a quick break with all things Zomato and Blinkit. See you on the other side. Okay, ladies and gents, we're back and kicking off with the first topic. We know we've obviously got, there's been a lot of drama, Amit. I don't know if you saw in the past week, 10 days
Hmm.
about Zomato, Blinkit. Blinkit apparently, being a little cash strapped, getting a last minute loan, through Zomato. And of course, this molds into the larger question, which is, what is the future of quick commerce, and are they going to be the bikes to Uber? Like, remember that phase where there was like
Yeah,
Lime
yeah,
bikes and this, that, and the other in the US, and all of them have like crashed and burned and like
yeah,
died somewhere.
yep.
If I had to, ask you for your quick hot take on quick commerce, is it needed? Have you tried any of these Zepto, Shepto, and all out?
I use them all the time. Now I'll
Mhm.
say this: I don't need 10 minutes, but the same delivery cycles that I get for Swiggy deliveries, which is 30, 40, 50 minutes an hour, I would love to get that on, like, just general grocery shopping.
Hmm.
I don't need 10 minutes though. But I love it. I mean, like, I use it. Like, I literally use it all the time. So I think I guess I'm a user. I'm a consumer.
You're the reason why they're running out of money, Amit. No, but just setting context for everyone who's listening in. So obviously, Zomato is known for their food delivery plus their restaurant discovery, which they end up doing on the dine out side. What Zomato did very interestingly and very differently from Swiggy is, so Swiggy obviously has Instamart, which is their version of quick commerce that's baked into their product, right? So it's not a feature; it's a feature. It's not a product unto itself. Zomato interestingly took a very different stance where they invested in Blinkit, which is outside of the overall scope of Zomato, and now obviously, and I think the original goal back then when they made their first investment in Blinkit was to merge it into Zomato, over a period of time. You're obviously seeing that getting accelerated now, given that everyone has generally realized that quick commerce is a cash guzzling machine. No one, whether locally or internationally, has been able to show any amount of unit economics on this particular exercise. And I think the larger question that it begs is, what was the strategy at Zomato's end? Why invest in something external when you can actually use your own audience and your own marketing, and use them across multiple different use cases, which Zomato's already doing with respect to dine out versus ordering in. Any thoughts on this? Like why would Zomato want to invest in something externally?
So I mean, like, the only thing I can think of, right, in this sense, and I think it makes it's a big ticket thing, right, which is why it's a little concerning or a little surprising, right? But if it was a smaller investment, then I can absolutely see the experimental value of something like this, right?
Hmm.
I think the idea of also just basically, when you the idea being the so so when I think of a business like Zomato, or if I think of a business like Blinkit, or if I think of, like, these are fundamentally logistics businesses,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that if you're a fundamentally logistics business trying to offer different tiers of logistics, right?
Hmm.
Stuff which can get out in an hour, stuff which can get out in 3 hours, stuff which can get out in 8 hours, 12
Hmm.
hours, whatever that may be. I think that there is some sense to, like, playing around with that. But again, with the kinds of money that's needed to be invested relative to the overall size of Zomato, it's a little, yeah, it's a little, I don't want to say concerning, but it's a bold bet.
Yeah, no, and also I think with Zomato, unlike Swiggy, they are definitely under the radar now
Hmm.
exponentially compared to what they were when they were a private company, right? And
Hmm.
obviously, their stock has taken a hit,
Yeah.
and one of the biggest concerns is how you're going to make money, because if you look at even like the DoorDash or Uber Eats, etc. in the US, yes, they're high top line businesses, but if
Right.
you look at the bottom line impact or any path to profitability, it's a big question mark across the board, right?
But if you're able to create a large top line business in this kind of a space where brand
Hmm.
value will become extraordinarily important, right?
Hmm.
Trust
Hmm, hmm.
becomes extraordinarily important. If you're able to create a a high top value top line business for this kind of a space, where I think and you're able to show progress towards the path to profitability, right? I mean, like you're
Hmm.
able to kind of see that, yeah, it might
Which
not
food
be
delivery
here,
is done, to be fair.
which food delivery has done exactly. And food
Yeah.
delivery, that was the first thing that everybody was like, hey, how can they
Yeah,
give
yeah,
us these
yeah.
kinds of discounts?
Cash
And
guzzler.
like,
Yeah.
we were all talking about that kind of stuff, right? So if there is a path to profitability visible, then I can
Hmm.
see the benefit of this, right? Because right now, when I'm looking at food, and this is not intentional, right? But I mean, like the fact is that Instamart delivers to me at my house, and so
Hmm.
Swiggy has become like the default kind of thing whenever I'm looking for anything, right? Oh, I need to get something
Hmm.
delivered. Let me go to Swiggy. Even if Zomato has equivalent, like they share many of the same restaurants, many of the same
Yeah.
things that you order at home, but I still wind up doing Swiggy just by default because that's the muscle memory on my
Yeah.
on how I do this, right? So I can see the benefit, but it
Hmm.
has to there needs to be it can't be like a black hole.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think, obviously, you've got Dunzo, which, may feel like a third cousin in all of this, given that they really were, first to market with, quick delivery. Not that grocery was ever a big area of focus for them. Theirs was, just general like FMCG
Right.
commodities. You've got Big Basket taking the space, very seriously, and also experimenting. I think, when I look at spaces, I always look at counterparts in the US and China, because
Mhm.
you end up seeing a lot of those narratives sort of flowing back over here, right? And whether we like it or not, a lot of even the way investors look at these businesses ends up stemming from what American or Chinese counterparts are doing. I think where I 100% agree with you is that in general in India there's a massive opportunity for general trade disruption,
Yeah.
given how much of FMCG and grocery consumption takes place in general trade versus modern trade.
Mhm.
And I do think that there is an opportunity for, quote unquote, branding general trade, right?
Mhm.
Where technically Instamart, Dunzo, potentially Blinkit, etc., are all like rebrands of your Kirana store.
Right.
But if you look at the American context, there's a bunch of companies that have already started shutting down. So Fridge No More, which launched in October of 2020,
Mhm.
that had competitors like Joker, Gorillas, and Bike, which came much later in September 2021. Fridge No More has shut down. Bike, spelt as Buyk, which touted 15-minute grocery deliveries in New York City and Chicago, with no minimum order fees, actually laid off all of its 870 employees. So in the US, you're seeing a lot of these just, combust. And I think one signal that that's going to send to Indian investors is, bro, like if an American with higher ASPs, higher average order values, better everything capacities to spend, if they are struggling with this, and what really happens to Indian counterparts?
So I would say one big difference between the US and India in that sense, right? And you shared some articles around Europe as well as around how some of the companies are struggling, but they're still trying to make their way. I think
Hmm.
India is a better analog to Europe, right? Because of the population density aspect of things. The
Hmm.
number of people you can service out of a single center in India would be much, much higher than the number of people you can service out of a single center in the
Makes
US,
sense.
right? And I
Yeah.
think that does change the way that you would approach the economics of something like this.
Yeah, but let's see how things add up over here.
Yeah.
IPO, you had a story on IPO?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You brought up Zomato and how it's under scrutiny because of the IPO, and that is one of the reasons. That's one of the things that's happened, right? So SEBI has brought up a consultation paper where they are looking to try and look at more KPIs in terms of what companies they're going to allow to IPO or not. The reason for that being that fundamentally, a lot of these companies that have IPO'd recently, the tech companies particularly, Zomato, Policy Bazaar, Paytm, all of them have seen significant losses post IPO.
Yeah.
Now the thing is that the question I have is the kinds of things that they're looking to do are normally internal measurements that most that companies use, right? Those are the kinds of metrics they're looking at. Now, my question is, are people really are people does anybody really invest in Zomato or Paytm or policy bazaar also, for that matter, with the idea that, hey, this Nika, that this is what they're that this is today's value that we are investing with, or are they always, or are they looking future? Are they looking towards the
Hmm.
future? And if they're
Hmm.
looking to the future, I mean, that how does that change? Right, these new metrics are only going to give you what's happening currently. They're not going to give
Yeah.
you, like, a different future outlook or something like that. And if you're investing in the growth story or something, there's inherent risk in that. So the question is, so the question fundamentally becomes, right, is it the Indian share market?
Hmm.
How risky should the stocks within that share market be? And
Hmm.
if I may, does higher risk exist in companies which are generally tech companies and super transparent about how they do business, versus all
Yeah.
these murky companies that exist, which are like promoter A ka, like other company, and promoter B ka, secondary company, and all of that, right? All this stuff also
Hmm.
exists, and they all go public because they're able to play the rules. Over here, you
Yeah.
don't game the rules, and now they're putting in new rules. And I just find this to be I think it's difficult. I think it's going to cause tremendous issues for the ecosystem at large. I think that
Yeah.
being able to IPO in India as an Indian company is important.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think I have like I won't even say counter opinion, but I kind of get where it's coming from because, one bad IPO can rock the boat for so many others, right? And you kind of saw that happening with Paytm, where MobiQuick apparently was supposed to IPO earlier this year, but they
Mhm,
pulled back after seeing, what ended up happening with Paytm on public markets.
mhm,
And of course, a bunch of other companies that had planned their listings in this quarter. A couple of folks have pulled out, like the names you were hearing of, Delivery and like First Cry and the likes. Their timelines seem to, sort of be all over the place. So I get where I get where the intent over here is coming from, where it's coming from finally technology companies in India are looking at public markets as a way of generating capital. Let's not totally blow that up by not having amounts of diligence and amounts of data points available, where even retail investors are able to make an educated guess. Now,
mhm.
in the grander scheme of things, all of this is gambling, right? All of this is taking a punt on the probability of something happening or not happening in the future. So the real question to ask over here is, do all of these additional KPIs and data point diligences, do they lead to the retail investor being better educated than they were, perhaps before?
No,
And
because sorry, but because the retail investor who they're trying to protect is the
hmm,
retail investor who is, hey, my uncle's father's cousins just gave me a tip and I'm buying this share. That's the retail investor they're trying to protect, and that retail
yeah,
investor is not protectable.
hmm,
Right,
hmm,
I mean, like, the person who anybody who is doing, even like, and I'm not even saying read the entire red herring prospectus, right?
hmm,
But even the person who's doing, like, read 6 articles about this on, like, your money control and your mint and your 5 other places, even
hmm,
that person should realize that, hey, there is risk inherent in this. These are
hmm,
not logical valuations compared to what you get in stable companies, right?
hmm,
The value is because there is a certain number of shares available. I believe long term value is there for this, so I want to be a part of this growth story.
hmm, hmm,
That's
hmm,
why people are investing here, and that's a rational way to invest as well.
hmm,
Right, I mean, like,
hmm,
there's no irrationality there. It's a completely rational thing that, like, I believe Nika is one of, like, whatever the value is right now, it's going to be 10 times higher than what it is right now. I
yeah,
don't care. I just
yeah,
don't care. I know that the Indian internet growth story has so much more to go. The number
hmm,
of women online in India has so much further to go.
yeah,
Indian women are always lagging behind men when it comes to online participation. All of this
hmm,
stuff is kind of known as macro factors. I believe
hmm,
Nika is going to grow no matter what, right? So I mean,
yeah,
like, this is not stock advice, so please don't come sue me. But I believe Nika is going to grow, right, no matter what. So I mean, like, yeah, it's going to go up, it's going to go down. But again, people who are trying, why are we trying to protect people who are trying to make a quick buck? We shouldn't. If they're going to buy today and sell tomorrow, we shouldn't try to protect those people. They're traders. They're not investors.
I can't say I disagree with your qualification of who these people are, but at the end of the day, the whole purpose of having entities like SEBI is to is regulatory purposes, right? The whole
Yes.
and essentially what regulation means in this context, and at least the way they're paraphrasing what regulation. So, for example, like a more interesting thing for okay, so let me ask you a question. If you had to, if SEBI had two options, right? One option was to limit, was to raise the bar for what company is allowed to IPO and what isn't, because essentially what you're saying is, it's a free market. If you're going to be like a Tinder swindler, want to make a quick couple of bucks here, there, and everywhere, you know what you're signing up for, and if you face losses, that's your problem, buddy. So my question for you is like, what does SEBI do in a scenario like this? Like, do you just say ki jo hona hai hoga, aap, like you let people pick their
we,
own devils?
we already have tremendously overregulated markets.
Hmm.
They are extraordinarily opaque, they're overregulated to a great degree, and there's a lot of backstory, there's a lot of back end manipulation that occurs in these markets just generally, right? But we
Hmm.
already have extraordinarily overregulated markets. We need to cut the regulation, and this is
Hmm.
just adding more stuff right now. Right now it is, if you want to IPO today, okay,
Hmm.
it's impossible for a, so I think first, so there is a rule that companies beyond under a certain valuation are not allowed to IPO, and that
Hmm.
rule, that
Correct.
number
Yeah.
is absurd. That number
Hmm.
is something like, you got to be a 100 crore rupee company or something like that. It's a very high bar to cross. Now
Yeah.
that is foolish in and of itself, because what you are now doing is, so I have a strong point of view on this, right? What you're doing is that you're essentially allowing only the rich to participate in the most potential future large opportunities that exist. Because
Fair.
who is going to be able to invest in sub 100 crore rupee companies? VCs, angel investors, people who already have money, right? And
Yep.
so we've created like these kinds of perverse incentives over there. Then when you look at the regulatory issues that come around IPO stuff, right, or sorry,
Hmm.
being a public limited company, I have a few friends and cousins who are involved in this stuff.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
when they have to deal with these things, right, I mean, like the nightmares they go through, right, I mean, like
Yeah.
literally literal sleepless nights trying to get documentation in place, because a
Hmm.
comma cannot be misplaced, and I mean, like it's insane the degree of
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
regulation that is around this stuff. So I mean, like, I think we're already overregulated. I don't think I think we're this is essentially a solution in search of a problem. Markets are
Hmm.
volatile. Nobody was complaining
Yeah.
when everything was going up, right?
Yeah.
For the
Yeah.
last two
Fair.
years, what have we seen in the markets? The markets have gone like insane, right? Nobody's
Yeah.
complaining at that point in time. Now that the markets have gone down a little bit, everybody's complaining. I mean, like, come on.
Mm-hmm.
The markets are
Preach.
not meant to they're,
Preach.
they're not
Yeah.
meant to only go up, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, absolutely, and totally fair points, especially on India being overregulated. But let's switch gears into a company that's seen all kinds of regulatory slaps
Hmm.
being thrown its way, and unfortunately has had to let go of about half of its employees. Trell was in the news this past week, and obviously the story around Trell was there was some issue around governance and this, that, and the other. We don't want to go too much into that because everything is opaque and not clearly reported. But I think the larger question that came out was just looking at their financials. Right, their this company is raised about. Northward of 70 million. They were apparently in talks with Amazon to raise another 150 odd million, and
Yeah,
that round seems to have obviously gone kaput. And if you look at their financials, I think their last reported revenues were close to about 10 crores,
yeah.
which seems like a very underwhelming number for the amount of money they've raised. That's one. And the second, obviously, is the amount of users that they claim to have, right? They claim that
Hmm.
their monthly active user base is in between that, 50 to 70 million ish odd number. So social commerce, was like the golden child. I remember, 2 3 years ago when we guys were fundraising, everyone was asking us, "Oh, is LBB going to do social commerce?" And we categorically said we don't believe in social commerce, and if there is an opportunity, it's going to be won by Instagram and YouTube, not an
Right.
Indian company, right? But if you look at the landscape, all of these guys, SimSim got acquired by YouTube, Shop 101, Glow Road have seen their own acquisitions. MyGlam apparently has bought the last one standing, which was Bulbul,
Yeah.
and now you've got Trell, which is in significant soup, right? And Misho's the only one
Hmm.
who seems to have stood the test of time, but they're also running into their own, significant challenges. So,
Hmm.
social commerce, are you a believer, non-believer of, consumer influenced commerce?
So I am a believer to some degree. I'm not 100% believer, right? I think that there are opportunities in social commerce in certain categories. But beyond that, I think that this idea that everybody's going to buy everything off Instagram, I thought was just dumb on its face, right? I mean, like,
Mhm.
but at the same time, no, I
You
mean, like,
don't mince words. Yes.
no, but I mean, I mean, like, there are things which make sense from a social commerce perspective, right? If I see that my friends are buying, if I see my friends are buying a certain kind of shoe, maybe that
Hmm.
shoe appeals to me, right? And I'm
Hmm.
like, hey, okay, yeah, that looks interesting, maybe let me go check out what they have, right? So I think
Hmm.
there are some things that are there, but I mean, like, I'm not not everything is coming through that kind of thing, right? So I mean, like,
Hmm.
I thought that the case for it was overstated.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I think there is a space for it, right? I think there is a place for it. But it might fundamentally be like, it's a feature, not a product thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I feel like there is a space for it, but I don't think that it's going to be the be all end all.
No, 100%. And, I think what's really important with social commerce is to think of things through first principles, right? Which
Hmm.
is what you're saying as well. At the end of the day, no one wakes up in the morning saying, I want to buy something that an influencer has recommended. That's just
Yeah.
not how consumers think. And especially in a country like India, right? Where everything from the amount you earn to your discretionary spends are already so limited,
Hmm.
and those discretionary spends end up getting split, in multiple different categories, and in multiple different subcategories as well. So I think the large problem which a lot of these companies who pitch social commerce have not been able to clarify, or even articulate fairly well, is what is the job to be done for customers.
Yeah.
And even if you look at like Chinese examples, like in a previous episode we guys had discussed this guy called the lipstick king of China,
Yeah, I
and
remember that.
he had sold apparently like $2 billion in gross sales worth of products in a 12 hour live stream on one of these Chinese apps. I think anything that's 100% modeled off of China, always a little apprehensive about, because China itself is a black hole, right? Like no one
Hmm.
knows what that number actually is. Was it
Yeah.
2 billion, or was it like 2 million?
Was
like
two
like what was it
Yeah, was 2 billion
exactly?
the press release or the actual sale? Who knows?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And because everything in China is so opaque, and numbers coming out of China are also so, it's just impossible to verify, the strength or the degree of it. I think the larger sort of question over here was, even in the US, there is no model that has, made a go off of influencer or creator led commerce, right? Even Instagram, for that matter, if Insta Shop was doing so well, you would have seen, in my opinion, a larger focus and a larger doubling
Yeah.
down on that by Instagram. And you would have also seen a larger creator focus at the end of Instagram, neither of which have happened. Like Instagram's launching subscription now.
Yeah.
So if
And
you look at
that's
any of
where
these,
the funnel
yeah.
is, right? I mean, like on Instagram, compared to
Hmm.
a smaller app, which is more like, hey, come to our app and the different people are going to tell you what to buy, which I think is a little problematic from a product point of view itself. But
Yeah.
compared to that, like an Instagram, it's a larger funnel. So if you're not seeing traction over there on this kind of stuff, then I
Hmm.
mean, like, you're absolutely right. I think it's very limited. Sorry, I interrupted what you were saying.
No, and another really interesting point is category. So, for example, for Trell, apparently one of their biggest categories is beauty, and that seems to be a significant focus. Now, again, man, like if a customer wakes up in the morning saying, I'm out of mascara, I need to buy, like, beauty as a category is a very refill category, right? So
Yeah.
actually Nika's model over there of like give customer selection and give them the smoothest customer experience around delivery of that product to their homes or whatever, that makes sense, because that is the nature of beauty is not a category that needs too much discovery on platform. Discovery happens through YouTube videos, Instagram videos, like off platform, but there isn't too much on platform discovery that's needed. And if I'm not mistaken, I think even Falguni Nair, the CEO of Nykaa, I think in her last quarterly earnings call, she very politely said that we don't necessarily believe in content to commerce, quote unquote, but obviously Nykaa has continuously spoken about the moat that content has in brand building, bringing customer acquisition
Yep.
costs down, etc., etc. So if the person at the peak, right, like at the top of Mount Everest, is telling you that, there is no such thing as a person sees an influencer touting something on Instagram and immediately makes a purchase. And beauty as a category is a category of refill, it is a category of uniqueness, of selection. Why Trell would double down on beauty as a category, versus others which are genuinely more tuned to discovery, is a bit of question mark. And in the grander scheme of things, I mean, there's Nika, there's Purple, there's My Glam and It's Sweet, then there's private labels like Sugar Cosmetics,
Mhm.
where how Trell would even be able to get market share is a bit of a question. But again, I think every founder goes through, all types of journeys, and I genuinely wish Trell a speedy recovery. But keeping that aside, I think on all things social commerce, there is a lot of hoopla, but not enough people who've been able to show traction.
No, it's interesting, right? I believe in I believe in the powers of influencers like Varun,
Hmm.
right? I believe in
Hmm.
power. I believe in the power of influencers to be able to push products. But I believe that that's an evolution of the celebrity endorsement,
Yeah.
right? I believe that that's the evolutionary path to that, right? It's not gonna upend the commerce models of how people are buying the things that they are buying,
Hmm.
not to
Hmm.
that degree at least, right? I think
Yeah.
that they're trying to put these two things together, right,
Yeah.
is not necessarily going to lead to the kinds of like 2 plus 2 is equal to 8 that people are hoping to see.
Correct. 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 And one last thing over here before we get on to, your topic, which I think is
Yeah.
also extremely important to cover, given, everything that's happening in the world and how
Hmm.
hot Delhi is in the middle of March. So, one quick thing, actually, a model that I would invest in over here would be something like Link in Bio. I don't know if you saw, but
Hmm.
they
I
also
saw
again
that
recently
link tree.
raised
Yeah.
a yeah, they raise a significant amount of money, are valued at northward of 1 billion,
Hmm.
and though again, they say they have like 12 million subscribers or some such thing. I think tools is going to be an interesting play over here versus
Hmm.
the platform play where there's burden on you to make the influencer find the category and then ship the product.
Right, exactly, exactly. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think tools for these kinds of things are probably underrepresented and
Yeah.
under available, primarily
Hmm.
because I mean, like all these platforms function in their own silos, so they don't allow like this. But there is a huge opportunity in the tools around social influencership. I guess
Yeah.
that is still kind of this. But yes, let me bring up the topic that I wanted to talk about, which is the Mumbai climate plan for the year 2050. So, Uddhav Thackeray, the chief minister, announced that we would like to see climate neutrality by 2050.
Hmm.
What's your first thought here? Do you think that this is even? Do you think this is a doable thing?
Um, I am always very, 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 very skeptical about any like random mandates that governments come up with,
Mm,
because historically there has been no, there is no case to point to where things that are said have actually been done. I love the way Uddhav Thackeray is assuming he's going to be in power for the next 30 years, and that this plan will stand the test of time. But I'm always very apprehensive about these very like long term ways of operating, because government changes happen,
mhm,
local municipality changes happen, and suddenly the progress that you may have made in 5 years gets totally wiped out. So at the outset, not a believer of these like long term plans, and I think especially with climate change, yes, there has to be a long term goal of reducing carbon emissions, this, that, and the other. But given the urgency of the situation, there have to be very quick, band-aid type approaches happening
mhm.
in parallel to, I think long-term
Yeah,
plans should happen at a national level.
yeah.
I'm not sure if they're needed at a state level. At a state level, you need more short-term, immediate, quick fixes to sort these issues out.
Yeah. Now, what I find interesting about this, right, is that Mumbai is a city that has to think about this very seriously.
Hmm.
We're very sea facing. We're very, or I mean, like the coast is a big part of the city itself, right? So if sea levels rise, we're all pretty much screwed.
Hmm.
But at the same time, Mumbai is also a city that was built a long, long time ago, right?
Hmm.
So how do you kind of so, for example, one of the biggest contributors to carbon, right, or
Hmm.
to carbon emissions is traffic,
Hmm.
right? But now, how do you? But again, and our roads are small, so it takes
Hmm.
forever to get from one place to the other. People are stuck in traffic.
Mumbai
So now
infra is the worst.
it is. But now, if
Yeah.
you build new infrastructure, right, and which they, I mean, like to their credit, the past few governments it's continued over the past few governments, but they're looking at, building out a lot more in the metro space. Bus lines are increasing, and there's this coastal highway going on. And so there is a lot of work going on the infrastructure front. But now
Hmm.
the problem is that this infrastructure creation is one of the biggest causes of pollution in the city, air
Yeah.
pollution and noise pollution, right?
Yeah.
Like I have friends, and again, I'm not trying to make my rich friends seem very sympathetic. I mean, like,
Hmm.
having a huge balcony and living on the sea is a privilege. It's not a
Hmm. Hmm.
this,
Hmm.
right? But
Yeah.
I mean, like, they can't sleep all night because of
Hmm.
work going on and because of the noise pollution that comes in. The air is like they literally have to get their air conditioned service like 3 times a month because
Hmm.
it's so disgusting, the amount of dust in the air,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No,
And
Bombay has really fallen from grace, man.
yeah,
In my recent trip to Bombay, it felt like Delhi, which is not a
yeah,
compliment in terms of
no,
like air quality. So I can
yeah.
I can totally imagine.
But again, all of this is being done with the idea that this will improve our air
Hmm.
quality in the long run, and right now we have to
Hmm.
take some short term pain to get there.
Hmm.
But I mean, like, because again, if you don't do this kind of thing, the city itself, like, if if you have the opportunity to live in Bombay, or you have the opportunity to live in another city, though this
Hmm.
city doesn't really exist in India at this point in time, but hopefully one comes up or one kind
Yeah.
of starts developing out, right? But where you didn't have these kinds of pollution issues, and didn't have these kinds of traffic issues, and you didn't have these kinds of infrastructure issues,
Hmm.
the city will eventually fail if you don't fix these things, because it is
Hmm.
a problem, right? Right now, to get from one end of the city to get to the other end of the city is a 2.5 to 3 hour commute.
Hmm.
That's insane.
Hmm. Yeah,
That's not
it's
something
horrible. Yeah.
you can't expect people to do that on a day-to-day basis, right? So
Yeah.
so then that turns it, so again, how do you fix all this, right? I mean, like, if you
Hmm.
don't improve infrastructure, then you can't improve the quality of life that exists, and the city will die. And if you do
Yeah.
improve infrastructure, you're killing some other thing. So, I mean, like, just thinking about this and reading all this stuff has made me more sympathetic towards government figures than I feel like I've ever been in my life. But it's a thorny problem.
I think the one big question to ask over here is what the hell was Bombay doing for the past couple of years with respect to infrastructure? Because in any trip I make to Bombay, I'm just like, y'all keep going from bad to worse.
Yeah,
Like, you know what I mean? And I think I'll have to give credit where credit's due. Delhi's infrastructure is class apart. If you just
it
had to
is.
look at Delhi versus Bombay versus, Bangalore though is the worst.
Yeah.
But I think the big question to ask over here is where is all of that municipal corporation money going slash where has it gone over the past decade, because all of these problems should have been
Mhm.
fixed a really 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 long time ago. Like
Or at
Delhi's
least,
metro is like a 20-year-old story, man.
yeah.
How does Bombay not have its shit together with respect to basics?
Well, I mean, again, part of it has to do with city construction, the way the city itself is set up, right? I mean, like,
Yeah.
you have town, which was you were South Bombay, which used to be earlier the main part of business area. Now the main
Hmm.
business area has moved to BKC, so you're
Hmm.
seeing that move out there. So it became a little more central in that sense. That allowed you to kind of, put lipstick on a pig, if you will, where you just
Yeah.
assume that things were not as problematic as they actually are. But
Yeah.
it's, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I don't know what I don't know how they should go about fixing this situation that exists. But
Hmm.
if action is not taken, serious action, right? I
Hmm.
mean, like, I live literally 150 meters away from the sea. My
Hmm.
building will be gone by 2050 if this stuff doesn't stop, right? And
Yeah.
so, I'd love to see what are the how this plays out, right? I mean, like, it's good to have ambitious goals, but again,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, I mean, like, if somebody else comes in and says, okay, hey, no, 2050 is too impractical, we'll do 2075, and then the next person comes and says, no, we'll do 2100, and then
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it can just keep going forever.
Moral of the
So,
story, guys, is don't have kids. Don't have kids. Especially if you're in Bombay, don't have kids. No, but
uh,
switching gears into
yes.
obviously, totally off topic is this world of like no code, right? Which
Uh-huh.
seems to be the modus operandi of a lot of new emerging technology startups. So every company is now becoming a tech company, from the likes of Pratilipi to
Hmm.
LBB to even a seller on Shopify, right? At
Hmm.
some level, you need to have some technical infrastructure in how you think about your business or operations or whatever else. And obviously no code tools are back in vogue because they're trying to give
Yep.
non developers the ability to make sites and apps very quickly.
Hmm.
There are a bunch of companies taking very very different approaches, and we'll run through a few of them in just a bit. But you're like a Notion stan and a Notion fanboy. Is no code as like no code as they make it out to be?
Well, so no code is no code if all you're doing is like what they expect you to do. But the second you want to
Hmm.
extend it, right? And you do, right? So like one of the things we're doing is we're trying to build a database in Notion for some stuff, and that requires some connection with Google Documents. So now when we want to work with Google Docs, we have to then work with the Google Docs APIs to be able to kind of do certain automated actions. So now no code. It's no longer no code, right? Now you need an engineer on board who's going to be able to kind of help you work with the Google Docs API and then kind of insert that and get that to work with this. Even for that matter, like the IVM podcast website, right? We started that as a Squarespace website. It's
Hmm.
7 years ago, still running as a Squarespace website. Some parts of it are different, right? Like our show catalogs comes from a different backend, but the rest of the stuff, right? Your basic about this, that, all that stuff, that comes from Squarespace.
Hmm.
There is a little bit of so they have this thing called a code injection in Squarespace, right? A code
Hmm.
or a code snippet kind of thing.
Hmm.
So we've
Hmm.
done some coding inside that as well to kind of make these things work. So no code is unless it's exactly what you need, no code is rarely no code. At least in my
Yeah.
experience, I found even something like WordPress or something like that, right? I mean, like way back when I sort of kind of understood a little bit about development, I used to go in and like change the PHP code around a little bit
Yeah.
on the templates just to kind of like make certain things happen in certain ways. So
Yeah.
no code is not is rarely ever completely
100%
no.
no
Yeah.
code. Yeah, yeah. No, you're totally right. And, it reminds me of like our early days also because we started out on WordPress and even I had to learn like the basics of coding because, like you said, you want to change a small function, you want to make the, website more conducive to MWeb,
Yeah.
layouts. You end up having to make a couple of changes. But I think looking at the landscape and obviously where this topic came from was Webflow, which ladies
Hmm.
and gents, I'd highly encourage you to check out. It's a super fun a way of making light websites. I've used this myself a bunch of times. In fact, a bunch of things on LBB are built on Webflow, and again, it's really fun. Like especially if you're creative and you enjoy design, and you just want to tinker around a little bit. Webflow is definitely a darling for designers, and then they recently raised a significant round. Valuing them at about 4.5 billion. So again, one of the real breakout companies of the past couple of years. So Webflow is one where, again, what's interesting is they target the design community, right?
Hmm.
And they make tools that make it easier for designers, so your UI UX guys to really experiment, play around with, and also create websites as easily as is possible. On the other end of the spectrum, you obviously have the likes of Wix, Squarespace, WordPress, which are meant for people like you and me, right? Like
Hmm.
business owners who need web presence, may
Right.
not necessarily want to pay too much for web presence or have a
Hmm.
full-time team for web presence, but these platforms make it easy for entrepreneurs or like
Yeah.
small startups to get comfy with their web presence.
Hmm.
You obviously have slightly more hectic tools like Airtable, Coda, and then of course like Google Sheets.
Even something like Shopify.
Exactly,
Yeah.
qualifies over here as well. But
Yeah.
what's interesting about Shopify, to the point that you made earlier, is Shopify literally has like an army of there's not a single Shopify store owner who I know in India who doesn't have like an agency that they've outsourced,
Yeah.
building their Shopify
Well,
website to.
maybe not at first, right? Because I mean, like, I
Hmm.
know that I set a friend up on Shopify. Like, I
Hmm.
got their whole thing set up, and like, they're already. So this was right after Shopify had integrated with CC Avenue. So all you
Hmm.
needed to
Yeah.
do was sign up for a CC Avenue account, and your payment gateway was integrated. And the
Hmm.
rest of that, I remember getting them set up like in a day. So I mean, like, Shopify is interesting as long. You're right, but again, it's a question of when you want to start doing other things.
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
just are okay with their this, then it's fine. But the second you're like, hey, instead of this drop down, I want this drop down, or instead of this drop down, I want to have something where all options are visible and somebody can check from there. But the second you want to do
Yeah.
that, you need somebody else.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I think what makes his space so interesting is just the ability to, pick audiences and market products to different types of audiences. So, for example, if you look at Retool or AppSmith, right, these are very
Mhm.
advanced. They, do require knowledge of coding like APIs, databases, etc., and are extremely useful for internal teams to build internal apps and tools. So, Retool and AppSmith is targeting that is are literally targeting developers who want easier ways to develop products better, faster, quicker, right? Like I said, you've got Webflow, which is targeting designers. You've got stuff like Glide and Bubble, which is specifically focused on building mobile apps, and they make it really easy to drag and drop common mobile components and deploy apps to both Apple and Google Play stores. So you've got those, and then like I said, you've got the Wix, Squarespace, WordPresses of the world that target the solopreneur or the small business. So I think what's really interesting about this space, and then obviously you've got Notion where it's difficult to tell who they're targeting. They're definitely targeting enterprises, but they're targeting like all components of enterprises, right? Like I've
Yeah,
seen a lot of enterprises use Notion as their like default website, and
yeah,
Notion isn't your typical quote unquote website, right? Like they don't have those sparkly layouts with like sparkly buttons and lots of like sparkles and like glitter and like shit like that. So I
yeah.
think what's really interesting about this space is it's almost as if these companies are unbundling different parts of an organization and looking at their coding needs. And all of these are billion-dollar opportunities, man. Like
Yeah.
there's no company that I mentioned over here that isn't already or doesn't have the opportunity to become a billion-dollar opportunity. So I think just from an opportunity perspective, such an interesting space to keep a track of.
It is, but again, these are fairly complex products to develop as well, right? I mean, like
Hmm.
Notion in the last. So I first saw Notion a few years ago when it first came out. Didn't really do much for me, right? I mean, like I'm like,
Hmm.
ah, okay, this is interesting. This it didn't really connect until I started seeing that. Oh, you know what? I love this idea that I can see something either as a Kanban board or as a list or as a table, right?
Hmm.
At that point I was like, oh, okay, this is really cool,
Hmm.
and this is really useful for my personal kind of workflow and stuff like that, right? Because
Hmm.
making notes around things and then having sub it's just, it really kind of worked, but it doesn't connect until it connects, right? In that sense, and
Hmm.
I think that a lot of these tools are like that, right? That
Hmm.
in theory they sound great, and I mean,
Hmm.
like, you first start looking at them, but until you start actually until they
Tinkering
kind of,
around.
yeah, until you start thinking on, no, until they scratch your itch,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
I feel
Hmm.
like they have to scratch your particular itch, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the I so again, Notion's replaced Evernote for me. I've been an Evernote
Hmm.
user since God knows how long, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
But Notion replaced that for me simply as a place to kind of keep this, because it did it better and did it in a more structured way. But it didn't come through until there were some things that got added into Notion which really kind of worked. So
Change the yeah.
yeah, no. So I think the challenge with the no code tools per se, in that sense, right? It's not a challenge, right? But I guess that's the thing that they're addressing too, is that until I mean, like, if it doesn't speak exactly to what you want to do, they're
Yeah.
not as flexible in some
As
ways.
you need them to be. Yeah.
Yes,
No, fair.
as yeah. So and so. They can be made flexible, but then that you need to really grok the tool to be able to kind of do that,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We have our last segment left, ladies and gents. But before we get into that, we're going to take a quick break, tune into a couple of advertisers and then get back with our audio segment. So BRB, ladies and gents, BRB.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cock and Bull, Cyrus and Silvery are joined by Naveen Narona and Sriram Padmanabhan. Tune in to catch them talking about Elon Musk's challenge to Vladimir Putin for a one-on-one battle to end the Russia-Ukraine war.
We have a brand new show on the network, Ek Chuski Finance, or a Sip of Finance, or Ek Sip Financha. Why does it have so many different names? Because it's a very ambitious project that we're launching at IVM Podcasts. 8 different languages. This is a really special one. It's a podcast that takes into account a female-first perspective of finance and how to get the most out of your money. On Advertising is Dead, Varun talks to Malini Agarwal, founder and creative director of Miss Malini Entertainment. Their conversation takes us through the journey of establishing Miss Malini, how it began as a blog and eventually became an empire. On the Habit Coach podcast, Ashton is in conversation with Roberta Hughes, founder and lead instructor, Peaceful Living, where they discuss how to add self-care into our daily routines. On Ikaduka Economy, Abhinav talks about how the war between Ukraine and Russia will impact India and the world's middle class. On Pulia Bazi, the hosts talk about the concept of one nation, one election. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any platform that you might be listening to us. You can also check us out on YouTube. We have a webpage, ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, where a list of all our channels are. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, SBI Life Insurance, Bank of Baroda, India Water Portal, and Max Life Insurance. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Okay, ladies and gents, we're back. And as a part of our last segment, we're going to be talking about the audio space. And I think if there's anyone who knows the A to Z of all things audio, it's Mr. Amit Doshi. Amit, let's kick off with, obviously when you guys started IVM, audio was equal to podcast, right? But now
Mhm.
this space has transformed so much. You have everything from live audio, which you saw, peak with Clubhouse and now with Twitter
Right.
Spaces. You've got platforms like Pocket FM, etc., which are sort of reimagining Audible almost
Mhm.
for the Indian audience. So can you
Mhm.
start by maybe giving us like a bit of a lay of the land, what is happening in audio today, especially in India?
Sure. So as you mentioned, right, there are these new players coming in, but I think you have covered the three things in that exist per se, if you will, right, or four if you include radio into it, right. So let's take radio as the offline incumbent space that exists right now. They're dealing with the challenges that they're dealing with. COVID basically hit them badly. Most radio was consumed during commute. Commutes died. So radio has been fairly negatively impacted by the previous 2 years, right? On the other side, on the flip side, right, a service like Pocket FM, Pratilipi FM, Kuku FM, who are all essentially OTT on-demand apps for audio, which is a little
Hmm.
different from what we do in the podcasting space. And I'll try and kind of push those two. I'll try and kind of separate those two things out, right? So when you look at these OTT audio, they're more story driven than podcast driven. So there's
Hmm.
a lot of audio stories happening. They're very serialized in nature in terms of the kinds of stories that they tell, right? So 10-15 minute kind of parts continuously going on for, in some cases I've seen stories as long as like 3-4 thousand minutes long, right? So just
Holy
continuously
shit.
go, yeah, just keep going, going. Then the third part is the podcasting space, which is what we do, which is a little more. We try and work more in a sense where our content's available distributedly. We have our own app,
Hmm.
and we think
Hmm.
our app is an important way for us to move forward and to kind of offer innovations in the way that we can make our content available to listeners.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
at the same time, we do my one of the beliefs that I do have fundamentally is that we should be where the listeners are. So whether that's a YouTube thing, whether that's a music app, whether that's on the podcasting apps that are on there, whether that's a website, wherever that is, right? We should not make it tough for listeners to listen to us. We should make it
Hmm.
easy. If you have certain habits where you're already consuming over there, let's make that the place where we're available at. And
Yeah.
then I guess the fourth thing would, well, actually maybe five things, right? So fourth would be social audio, which Clubhouse is obviously petered out to a great degree. And but Twitter Spaces is doing some really interesting things over there, right? And I do the Twitter Spaces makes a lot more sense to me than Clubhouse ever did. I have a
Hmm.
whole rant about Clubhouse, which I've done many times, so I don't think I need to go into it again. But Twitter Spaces I find really interesting, and I find some really cool stuff. Kara Swisher was on with Jon Stewart yesterday, right? That's like, yeah, I'm
No
listening to that.
way. I
Yeah,
miss that
I'm
shit.
like, I'm listening to that, right? I mean, like, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think Twitter Spaces is very interesting from a social audio, and this seems to be
Hmm.
an evolution of radio to a great extent because it's a live
Yeah.
system, right? And what Twitter has done in Twitter Spaces, which is already far superior to Clubhouse, is, or at least I think Clubhouse has it now, but they didn't for the longest time, the
Hmm.
ability to time shift. Can I come
Hmm.
back
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
listen to something later? Right,
Yeah.
because that just seemed ass backwards to me that you didn't do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There are reasons why Clubhouse didn't do that, right? The reason Clubhouse didn't. Okay, I'm gonna go like for 10 seconds into my Clubhouse rant, right? It was basically because it was a product made for Mark Andreessen and Balaji Srinivasan. That's why Clubhouse didn't do that.
Oh,
Yeah,
damn.
yeah.
Amit doesn't
Uh,
hold back,
yeah.
guys.
No, but it really was. It was a product made for people who wanted to be on the record, who wanted to talk to an audience but not be on the record, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's what Clubhouse was. Whereas Twitter Spaces obviously is like, hey, that's a dumb idea. Let's kind of make this so that people can listen live or come back later, like normal
Yeah.
people. So there's that, but then there's a lot of stuff that's happened in the audio tech space, right? I guess the voice technology space.
Hmm.
It's now become it's become so normal for people to use, like, Google search for voice search. It's amazing
Hmm.
how normal it is. You see people
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
the time, which was not this, right? I mean, like, so I think that's another area where voice, which is separate
Hmm.
from the audio space in some degrees, but all of the bodies put us together, which is why I'm bringing it up, right? The IMA,
Yeah.
IMMA, all of them consider voice and audio to be the same thing. So
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
that purpose, but yeah, that's
Hmm.
generally, these are the kinds of areas that people are doing stuff in. There's some interesting things happening on the voice equivalent of the deep fake side of things.
Hmm.
I've been seeing a lot of companies coming to us with, like, hey, we have these voice training modules, so then I can, like, like, I could take your last 20 episodes, just take your tracks, train the voice, and then we could just, like, type some stuff up, and then it would be in your voice. And I've
Hmm.
seen some of that stuff, which is really, really well done. So I
Yeah.
think that's an interesting area. I think that's an interesting area from a for IVM as well, to kind of do some stuff, not because we don't want to talk to our not because we don't want not because we want to fake what our hosts are saying, but
Yeah.
production problems. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's just easier, like, if I need a sentence in there at the end of a promo, rather than
Yeah.
trying to get you on to do the promo, just like, hey, we can type something up, promo's ready, put
Yeah.
that sentence at the end, and you're done. So I think that that's something, but I think it's also something to be aware of, and that people,
Hmm.
it's very under the radar right now at this point in time, and this shit's dangerous, right? Because
Yeah. Super. Super. Super.
yeah, anybody can call me and I'll be faking, and it's not that expensive. So
Yeah,
there is that.
yeah. In fact, it's interesting you say that. I was watching this Andy Warhol documentary on Netflix,
Hmm.
and they actually recreated his voice using some
Yeah,
AI tool. Obviously, they took permission from the Andy Warhol Foundation, but you're seeing a lot of that, happen as well.
yeah,
Which is super interesting, but also very scary all at the same
it
time.
is. It is. It is. It
Yeah.
is.
So
So
I had a quick question over here where,
sure.
you obviously articulated all the spaces for audio and voice at large. Obviously, one quick question that keeps coming up is monetization, right? Because at the end
Hmm.
of the day, all of this falls into the general bucket of media. And media in India, especially, hasn't had the world's best track record of monetization. And one could argue, even in the US, right? Where
Hmm.
apart from breakouts like Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, and all, there are very few media companies that have genuinely been able to stand the test of monetization time, right? So,
Hmm.
how do you think of monetization playing out for each of these buckets?
So I think in the audio space, just generally, right, when it comes to the audiobooks or those kinds of things, right? Uh, I think we'll have to see how that plays out. Because I think the models that are in front of people right now are Chinese models, which are generally on
Hmm.
a direct listener payment model, whether that's subscription, whether
Hmm.
that's contribution, whether that's some form of Patreon thing, whatever that may be, right? We're fairly
Hmm.
ad focused at this point in time, IVM, that, as in the podcasting space.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Again, one of my things is I mean, like, there is, I think Kunal Shah put this out there, right? Something along the idea of people in India value money over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that
We're time poor. We're time rich, money poor.
something like that, yeah. But
Yeah.
basically the idea being that, we'll try and do whatever we can to get it for free, even if we are
Hmm.
going to spend an hour on the effort of making it free. Whereas
Hmm.
what's the value of our hours time, right? I mean, like,
Hmm. Hmm.
that's the essential this. And so given that, I believe ad focused for us is important, right? I
Hmm.
also see how we look at podcasting itself, right? We think of our creators, like, we were like, as I mentioned when we were talking about the social commerce thing, I believe in
Yeah.
influencers. I think
Hmm.
influencers are impactful, but I think that it's a evolution of celebrity driven ads. In this
Hmm.
case,
Hmm.
I think our hosts that we work with, I
Similar to
think
how
that
it was for radio, where like your host became your like breakout personality stars.
correct. Exactly. So, and I think that having our hosts do messaging around advertising, it's well
Hmm.
proven. We've seen this in surveys we've done. We see this in surveys other people have done. But
Hmm.
people trust the people who they are working, or basically who they listen to on a
Listening
regular
to.
basis,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now, if somebody listens to Think Fast every week, they spend an hour a week listening to you and Varun talk.
Hmm. Hmm.
They
Hmm.
think of you all as people they know. So
Hmm.
when you start talking about a product, then they are more likely to pay attention. They're more likely to kind of see that as something that is valid, which is
Yeah.
why we can charge extremely high rates for advertising relative to traffic. But
Yeah.
it is also it also allows us to kind of, and see, the thing is that the folks who we work with, they'll say no
Hmm.
if they have conflicts with those products, right? So I think that
Yeah.
also, I mean, that's part of it. But that leads to a trust factor, which I think is important on the podcasting front. Voice is generally just tech, right? So that doesn't monetize,
Hmm.
strictly speaking, when you're
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
like automated ads and stuff like that. And when you're looking at a bunch of these different technology things, they're mostly services. So I think we
Yeah.
covered everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and assuming Clubhouse would have lasted, right? Like I don't even know what their general state is right now after the amount of money that they raise, but assuming Clubhouse would have lasted, what do you think the future of these platforms really is? Because you've obviously got the likes of Spotify now doubling down on podcasting and
Yeah.
doubling down on original content because that's the name of the game, right? You
Hmm.
can't make original music. You might as well figure out what is the next best alternative to music in a headphone, and
Hmm.
podcasting comes very close over there. So I guess my question over here is, how much of the things that we're seeing are features on large media platforms, like how Twitter has Twitter Spaces, Spotify will
Right.
have podcasts, or like
They
they'll
have
acquire Wondery,
Spotify
which is
has
plugged into there.
they have Green Room, right, which is their equivalent to Spaces.
Correct, correct, yeah, but
So
they also
yeah,
acquired a lot of podcasting platforms.
they do. They did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that sorry, I think I lost your question there.
So my question is, how much of these things that you're seeing in the audio space, right, which you categorized into like radio versus podcasting plus plus, how many of these do you see as being features versus being actually able to stand the test of time and becoming individual products by themselves? Which, to be fair, radio was, right. Like radio was a independent product by
But
itself.
was radio a product, or was radio a bunch of different products, right? In the context that we're discussing here,
Hmm.
right? Radio One is one product, and Nasha is one product, and
Hmm.
Mirchi is one product, right?
So
In
okay.
this,
Yeah, so the way I'd almost say it is like the medium is monetizable in
Mhm.
isolation. So for example, like the question over here would be, would Clubhouse be able to stand the test of time, or would Clubhouse have actually one way or the other had to be acquired by someone else because as a standalone platform it would have never made sense, versus
So
for example radio which standalone made sense, right?
I think Clubhouse as a platform was never. It was always it was always a feature. It was never a product,
Hmm.
because the idea of Clubhouse from a navigation perspective, from all of that, right? Just very difficult to hack as a product itself, right? So
Hmm.
in the case of Clubhouse, I think that's the case, right? In the case of most of, or Clubhouse or Clubhouse like features, live
Hmm.
audio features, right? I
Hmm.
feel like live audio is very much a feature.
Hmm.
I feel content companies are content companies, right?
Hmm.
So I mean, like, if you look at us, we are a content company at the end of the day.
Hmm.
We are agnostic towards the kind of content we are creating. We are creating conversational nonfiction content. That's what we do,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But we are not. We're not like. this is going to be on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
So we're not like that. We're audio only, and you must be audio only. And it was
Got it.
that's not the purity there, right?
Yeah.
For us, we believe that we are a product in the sense that our product is the IVM product, which is a
Hmm.
bunch of different shows in a bunch of different categories. I think
Hmm.
that you see similar when you're looking at the audio book type content
Yeah.
creators, right? So I think like Pratilipi FM, I think Coco FM, Pocket FM, these are products. Now,
Hmm.
is there some consolidation to happen? Is there some kind of like, will all three succeed wildly? That those are different questions,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But I think that they are definitely products. Now, how they go about monetizing in the future is also something to be observed, right? I mean, like at
Hmm.
this point in time, um, from what I understand, these are I mean, like I unsourced, industry talk, if you will,
Yeah.
right? What you hear is that Pocket is monetizing very well on subscriptions.
Hmm.
Sorry, very
Correct.
well on, yeah, very well on subscriptions.
On
You
subscriptions.
hear,
Yeah.
yeah, you hear the same for Cuckoo. I think they are monetizing on subscriptions also to a great degree, but they're also monetizing very well on individual purchases, right?
Interesting.
With Pratilipi also, I think we're monetizing well mostly on the idea of purchases rather than on
Hmm.
this. So it depends
Hmm.
on what the product mix is going to be. All this stuff will float around, fix around, change
Yeah.
around, right? But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the but the idea of a storytelling platform, a platform where you go to listen to stories, I think there's
Hmm.
something.
Yeah, super powerful over there. Last question for you here, which is, if you had to bet on like two, three companies in this space, right, in audio plus voice,
Mhm.
locally or like internationally, what would you park your money on?
So IVM first, I guess. I mean, like I think that we are doing good things. No,
Correct
and
answer.
huh? Well, yeah,
I
they
said
have to.
correct answer.
Can't do that. But I think that I think what we're doing is we're doing it in a very kind of we're trying to take where the world used to be and where the world is going, and trying to build a model which kind of accommodates both of those things, right? Because we do need to move advertising money from other mediums into this medium. That's going to
Hmm.
be a big part of how we kind of go ahead, right?
Hmm.
So I think that what we're doing over there is this. I think Twitter is one, Twitter Spaces, and that whole live thing, right? I think
Yeah.
again somebody else might come, but I think they win,
Yeah.
because I think the kinds of people who are going to do best at spaces are
Hmm.
going to be the people who are most active on Twitter.
Yeah.
Twitter is the social media for those kinds of people, right? I mean, like,
Correct. Correct. They've got the
uh,
influencer built out already. Now it's just a
yeah,
way of, yeah,
no, and
giving
also
that influencer more channels.
if you look at the kind of influencer on Twitter versus the kind of influencer on Instagram versus, I mean, like the
It's
Twitter
someone who likes to
influencer
talk.
is the
Yeah, yeah,
kind of
yeah.
person who seems more likely to get into a deeper discussion around
Discussion.
things,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think Twitter is definitely this. When it comes to when it comes to the audiobook space, right? I mean, like Pocket has clearly got a lead at this point in time over the other
Hmm,
two
hmm.
platforms, Kuku and Pratilipi FM. These are the three that I think of, right? But I'm really excited about what Pratilipi FM guys are doing.
Hmm.
And again, this might be internal bias, but at the same time, I just look at what they're doing and I look at the ambition of their product and I
Yeah.
look at the amount of things that they are trying to work on, and I'm
Hmm.
very impressed.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm seriously impressed, right? So I mean, like, I don't have the same degree of insight, obviously, into Pocket and Cuckoo and what they're doing, but when I
Hmm.
look at what Pratali BFM is doing, I'm super impressed. On the tech side, I think Google again. I mean, like, Apple is not in India. Apple's not for India, so Google is going to kill that.
Yeah.
Echo is also going to have limited applicability compared to Android phone penetration, right? So if you're looking at who is going to train the best Indian voice accents, I think the answer
Hmm.
to that's clearly Google. I don't think that anybody else is going to be able to, because that's how this gets better, right? When you're talking about
Yeah.
voice tech and you're talking about recognition and ability to kind of like, gauge context and all of that stuff, the more data you get, the better it's going to be. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's no way for anybody else at this point that I can see to
Hmm.
compete with Google in terms of just the sheer amount of data they're collecting.
For sure. And with that, ladies and gents, I think the way you've like broken up audio has been absolutely awesome, and I think, I don't know, man. As a consumer, I find the medium so powerful. I think the one thing where I just keep getting stuck is, uh, why hasn't this seen larger scale adoption? And I think that's a story that time will tell, right? Like that's a story that with more investments in the space, because
Mhm.
there's no single platform that can kill it all, right? Like you
Yeah.
need more money going into this space for there to be mass adoption.
And I'll also add, right, that I mean, like, even though we're talking about all this audio content being created now, this is relatively recent. I mean,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
3 years ago when we were making when we were by far making more podcasts than anybody else. Now
Hmm.
at this point in time, there are other people who are doing a lot more because their
Hmm.
models are different, right? But I think there's just such early days in the Indian audio ecosystem. So I started in 2015, right?
Hmm.
When I started in 2015, to my knowledge, there was one podcast out of India at
Hmm.
that point that was somewhat active.
Hmm.
That's it. And 2015 is not that long ago. It's seven
Yeah.
years ago,
Yeah.
right? Audiobooks in India were not there at that point in time
Hmm.
because Audible had not entered India at that point in time, right?
Hmm.
None of these other three companies were there. So, I mean, like,
Hmm.
we're literally talking about, like, in internet terms from the Indian ecosystem, we're talking about where we were in 2000 in
Yeah.
audio terms.
Yeah.
So it's so young in that
Only
sense.
onwards and upwards from here.
Yeah.
On that note, I think time for us to take a quick break. And when we're back, we're going to quickly break into recommendations. And that'll be today's episode, guys. But let's take a quick break, come back with recommendations, and see you on the other side. Okay, ladies and gents, we're back with very quick recommendations. It's been a lovely and long episode. I'm so happy to not be talking to Varun forever. So
Uh,
much depth. Oh my God, can't handle it. Okay, Amit, time for recommendations, man. What are you recommending to our listeners?
Sure. So I got a really quick one. So I really enjoyed Quentin Tarantino, one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, and I thought Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was a particularly good movie by him.
Hmm,
Better than not better, yeah, better. I've liked it a lot more than, like, some of the other more recent
hmm,
movies. I think best is Inglorious Bastards.
hmm.
Really enjoyed it. He turned it into a book. He turned it into a novel. It's a companion
Wow.
novel of the same book. So it
Hmm,
tells you mostly the same story, but it gets deeper into the Brad Pitt character
hmm.
because I don't know if you've seen the movie.
No, I haven't.
No, you haven't seen the movie. Okay, so in the movie, Brad Pitt's a really major character, but he's very
Hmm,
peripheral to Leonardo DiCaprio's character,
hmm,
in the
hmm,
sense that he's just his all you see about him is stuff around Leonardo DiCaprio, and then
hmm,
besides that, one other trip to Charlie Manson's whole thing.
hmm,
Other than
hmm,
that, he's very much kind of I mean, like, he's a major character. He's everywhere, but most of the story stuff is around Leonardo DiCaprio. This time, you
hmm,
find out more about Brad Pitt, and, like, there's I don't want to spoil the movie for you, but there's, like, this one question which is, like, raging on the internet about this movie,
hmm.
and so this kind of answers that question.
Delves into that.
Yeah.
Interesting. So my recommendation for this week, ladies and gents, is We Crashed, which is basically the story of WeWork. It's streaming on Apple TV. I have seen all of these. I saw The Dropout, which also is great, on Elizabeth Holmes.
Mhm.
I saw the Uber one, Super Pumped, which is horrible. I
Is
think
it
that
really?
oh God, it's terrible. Like the first two, it becomes bearable by like the fourth episode, but it's just like bad acting, like, overly dramatized. I don't know what has happened to Brian Koppelman or whatever his last name is,
Yeah,
the
no, I
same
know.
guy who made Billions. But yeah, but I found the show pretty nauseating in its like sound effects and this, that, and the other. And I found the
Okay.
acting to be pretty terrible. But the cake has been taken by We Crashed, which is a story of WeWork. And Jared Leto is insane in it, as is Anne Hathaway. The acting is great. The soundtrack is phenomenal. It's basically like all of 2010's best hits in that show. But three episodes are out. I saw all three of them yesterday during my holy break. But great show. Totally worth the time, and a very like undramatized version of what would have gone down at WeWork. So I recommend We Crashed. And
Check
with
that
that,
out.
ladies and gents, you have enough to watch for this week in between Amit and my recommendations. Next week, we'll be back with Varun, who will be repaired post his liposuction surgery from Thailand. And he's going to be back in action, and we'll be back to our usual tutu meme on that show. But thanks a lot for doing this, man, Amit. This has been awesome and fun.
No,
And I'm going to like drag you back into the show once a month.
sure, I'm happy to. This was fun too. I get to like rant about stuff that annoys me. Otherwise, I enjoy doing that.
Your clubhouse take was slam dunk. But thanks a lot, and ladies and gents, see you next week. Bye bye.